Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Mabel's Digital Confidence for Older People, Understanding AI and Mastering Three Easy Device Notification Shortcuts, I should say. Um, Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Damien, and I'm in the customer marketing team. And today I'm joined by Richard Scenna, the founding director of YourLink. YourLink partners with organisations and governments to build digital confidence for seniors, carers, and their care workforce. YourLink has trained more than 5,000 people across Australia. Passionate about inclusion, Richard champions practical, everyday digital skills that help people communicate, stay connected, and manage the everyday digital life with confidence. So welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Damien. Hey,
Before we begin, we will just do the acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continued connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Before I hand over to Richard, just a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions during the webinar, can I ask you to please put them in the chat? As you can see from the diagram that I've got on my screen, down the bottom of the screen, you've got some icons. You've got participants, chat, raise hand. If you click on the chat icon, that will bring up a chat box and you can drop your questions in there. What I will do during Richard's presentation is I will collate any questions and then we'll have a moderated quick Q&A at the end. One thing that I will request is if you have questions, please keep them up to a broad nature. Try not to add in any personal information just for your privacy. I'm going to stop speaking now and I'm going to hand over to Richard. Thanks, Richard.
thanks, Damien. And I'll just share my screen in a moment. Do you want to stop sharing, Damien? Thanks.
You do that.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Like Damien said, my name is Richard Scenna, and I am the co-founder of YourLink. I'm really focused on digital inclusion, digital skills, as Damien said. Really excited to be spending the time with you, and I'll share my slides in a moment. In that experience that we've kind of trained over 5,000 people, I've seen a lot of scenarios. It's been over the last 10 years in various care settings. And also around skills that will help either yourself or also the people you might be supporting. So whether you're caring for someone at home or a neighbor or a friend, these skills and these kind of the way we kind of train is about also helping others around you as well. So give me a moment, I'll just share my screen and I'll do a quick check-in. David, just give me a thumbs up that you can see that. Awesome, thank you. I also like to mention at the start of any training session, just be kind to yourself or anyone else that's kind of asking questions. We all got really different experiences, knowledge, considerations, concerns. So I think it's really important that we kind of think about that as we go into this. So even if you learn one thing, some of the things I show or talk about, you may know, but someone else here doesn't. So it's about that kind of experience and learning something, and also helping those around you. As I said, it's a kind of complex, changing digital world. All of us are grappling with it, trying to stay up to date. And so the fact that you're here joining or watching the recording at a later date, I think it's awesome. You're kind of taking the time out to learn a bit about this kind of world of AI. So what I'm going to talk about today, obviously with a topic like AI and tools and safety, we could be here all day, all week. There's a lot of areas that we could be covering. But today I'm going to kind of start with some of the introduction, sorry, to AI, a bit of the brands, the way you're seeing it, how you may start using it and consider how you might start using it, how brands around are using it, just so that we can get familiar with where it is and what it looks like. A couple of obviously helpful tips about either safety, how we might check from a security and if something is AI, and how we might check some things or kind of double check some things as well, and some settings as well, that if you're going to start using any of the digital tools, some settings that'll get you to kind of consider looking at, just remembering that every app, every technology we're using have settings. And so that's where you'll kind of dig in to kind of modify or check how things are being used as well. And then we're going to switch gears a bit. I always like to have something quite practical that you can use on your device, or there's someone around you that you can kind of help with their device as well. So I've got three kind of everyday device tips, primarily focused on phones. We kind of focus a bit more on app-based technologies, but I'm sure there's things you can transfer over onto the other technologies as well, like computers and watches and stuff. But three everyday device tips that I find really useful when I train seniors, carers, and members in the community. So just on that, YourLink partners with organizations. So the way we kind of work is we kind of work with people like Mabel, organizations like Mabel, to help their community, so their customers and the people they support as well. So I'll aim to keep things very simple and useful for you. Obviously, depending on what sort of device you might have, um, technologies kind of change, the labels, things might look slightly different. There might be an update to an app. So it's always important to remember this is, I'm showing some things, but it might look slightly different depending on what you're using or the rollout of an app. But you can kind of problem solve and look into how you do it on yours. So sit back and relax for the next kind of 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes, and I'll take you through what I want to show you. So let's start by introducing this idea of AI. And I'd like to begin also by mentioning that while I am really positive about some examples of AI, and I think it's got some exciting opportunities for us as a community, I think there's some really exciting aspects for us. I think, like many of us, there's also a little bit of, we're trying to understand the speed, the ethics, the where it's being used, and particularly with the people I support, I can kind of see how it can be quite overwhelming. So while I am a fan of AI in some contexts, I also want to teach you so that you know that that is here. We can't avoid it. We ignore it, sorry. We need to know and understand where it is and how it might be used so you can make a bit of a decision about how you may or may not use it, or the people you're helping may or may not use it. And so the idea of today is kind of a broad overview of the language and common aspects that we're all coming across. So for today's session, I want us to think of AI, artificial intelligence, as kind of, in a simple way, as a digital assistant. So an assistant that's going to help us do a bunch of things in a digital sense. So things that may have required a bit more time, knowledge, problem solving, learning, and kind of or creating digital content. So while there's a range of other scenarios of AI, for today, I want us to focus on it as a digital assistant, a way that we might be using our technology to kind of help us get digital tasks, things done on our phones or technologies. Common brands we are seeing is ChatGPT, ChatGPT, Meta AI, which anyone that's using WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, Meta is the parent company of Facebook. So you may, and I'll show you these shortly anyway. So Meta AI is the Facebook kind of AI tool. Google Gemini AI mode. So I'm going to show those three in particular. I'm going to talk about those three because they're the ones we're all kind of seeing or hearing about. But anyone using Microsoft Office in some way, so Word, Excel, some of those tools, you'll see something called Microsoft Copilot. And on Apple, there's also Apple Intelligence. There's hundreds of other ones. We're not going to kind of focus on that. But for the moment, the ones I'm going to focus on are going to be ChatGPT, Meta AI, and Google Gemini AI mode. But what I want us to consider is actually AI has been around for a little while. It's been around for a while in a way that many of us don't necessarily realize. So when we think about a common example that many of us are probably using or have used in terms of navigation and mapping, whether you're using, Apple Maps, Google Maps, Waze, or any other kind of mapping tool, online mapping app or website, it's all about getting you from point A to point B. So the digital task that we're doing is about a destination. We're trying to get from somewhere to get to somewhere else. But in order to do that job, it needs a bit of information. And in most of the times, you need the start and the end location, the destination, the type of transport. Are you driving? Are you catching public transport, walking? And then depending on what we select, there's a couple of other things, other factors that will kind of ask you for, or you might be able to include to help you with the AI tool, the mapping tool, to give you the better information. So it might be about time of, the time you want to leave. Do you want to take tolls or not pay toll roads? Some of those kind of considerations. So you might put in those pieces of information and Google Maps or Apple Maps will give you, it's going to take you this long to this long, and this is the path it's going to take. It also then updates, so the technology, the AI is kind of updating based on other inputs, other information. So the GPS, the location, the traffic, congestion. If you take a wrong turn, it adjusts. So it's updating, it's learning, it's updating based on some of that other information. If there's public transport considerations or delays. And so you can see how, for any of us that remember, looking at the UBD or the Gregories or the maps, and trying to guesstimate how long it's going to take us from point A to point B, trying to follow the map. In this case, mapping and these mapping apps have definitely, for me, I think, made an improved kind of experience for a lot of us. So it's quite a positive experience for us. But that's a common example of AI that you're kind of seeing out there in everyday technology use and community. There's other examples that we're kind of seeing or will see in terms of some of the positive and useful ways AI can be used, particularly in kind of a health or care kind of setting. But we might see, you're seeing things like the voice assistants. So that ability, and I'm going to, talk a bit about that as we go through this, but from an accessibility perspective, when we start thinking of accessibility, vision, any kind of physical kind of things that might be taking place, voice assistants can be an excellent way that's starting to help individuals to kind of, and there's elements of AI kind of wrapped up into that. Things like medication reminders and health tracking dashboards. So think about, if we're managing our certain health situations or we have other professionals that are part of our health kind of community in some way, they're able to manage, any kind of spikes in health or look at our health kind of data, so to speak, and potentially either prevent, manage, or respond to health situations. And translation. I'm truly excited by translation aspect of AI and technology. I think is quite a phenomenal aspect that when we live at a time that you can, at a push of a button, translate a range of languages is pretty cool, and is the area that's definitely growing and changing a lot more. So so what I'm going to do here, and let me just kind of talk you through what I'm going to do for these next sections. I'm going to focus on three of the common AI kind of examples that we're seeing in the community. So Google, ChatGPT, and Meta AI. And what I've got is I'm going to kind of talk to you about it, and I've got examples of how I'm using it. I've kind of recorded a short little screen share to kind of show you how it works. I'm going to talk you through some of the symbols as well, because one of the things that I find in my teaching and training is that the tools are relying a lot more on symbols now. And so for yourself, or if you're helping someone, it's really important that we start to recognize what these symbols might be. And so the microphone is our voice. So we might be using our voice as an input. And I'm going to talk about that in our last kind of section. Like any kind of camera symbol is using the camera in some way. But what we're starting to see is a couple of new kind of symbols. And Google has a range of kind of AI products out there. And I'm not here to say, and it's not my place to say you should or shouldn't be using any particular products and how, and that kind of thing. This is about individual kind of choice. I'm here to give you some information about these tools. Google has a range of things, AI mode, Gemini, Nano Banana. They've got all these names. They're kind of rolling out things, but just know that Google is rolling out a range of AI kind of tools. You'll see this kind of star shape around the place. Next to my Google symbol, there's kind of this star shape. And whenever you kind of see that throughout the Google ecosystem, the Google products, that's their AI kind of tool. So you're starting to see that kind of weave in around Google. So they've got an AI mode, and I'll come into that in a moment. They've got this other symbol, which is 3 lines with a little star. And this is really useful to know that it's actually purely it's voice mode with AI. And so what we're seeing, remember just a couple of slides ago, I spoke about voice assistants. This is that example of voice mode, AI voice mode. And then some people are starting to see this banana, this random banana. Not everyone has it yet, but the random banana is Google Banana. It is about image creation, creating images. And again, I'll talk a bit about that as we go through this. But let's just kind of have a look in standard Google. So in standard Google, if you're using Google already, how you're kind of seeing it come up now. So for example, I'm doing a search on Google. So I'm looking for aged care in Australia. So I'm just doing a standard kind of search out there, aged care in Australia. And you're starting to see, I'll just pause that for a moment. We're starting to see at the top of our search results an AI overview. So you can see the little star that I kind of described. And this is Google kind of, instead of having the list of results, it's got a summary, an AI overview at the top that kind of it pulls together based on the learning, based on other information, based on the technology kind of learning it. It's going to give me a summary of what that is. Important note here, it's not always right, and you must always check sources. So we're going to kind of talk through that as we talk through the next kind of 20 minutes. But it's important to kind of recognize that the links, the sources may not be factually correct. So you want to kind of make sure we double check things. But if I continue that and I press on this show more, you'll see here this show more is going to come up and take me into AI mode. Take me into this full kind of AI mode, and it gives me a lot more information. And here, the bottom where it kind of says and ask anything, this is where I'm in assistant mode. So let me just pause, sorry. I'm in assistant mode, and so I can go back and forward and say, great, you've given me this. It's not quite what I want, or in this case, it's not quite what I want, or maybe I want to update it with step by step, or maybe I want some other information. But in this case, what I'm going to do is actually ask it to translate what I found into another language. And in this case, I'm going to ask it to translate to Spanish. And you see how quickly that kind of works. So again, I can find the result, what I want. Now, if I pause for a second, you'll see that symbol again, the 3 lines with the kind of Gemini kind of, the Google search mode. So you start to see the symbols throughout. Now, to some degree, it's really important to also recognize that your imagination is the limit to some degree with what you might look for. And I've got 2 other examples in the next ones that we're going to use. So in this case, if I'm looking for something factual about any rules and things like that, I would make sure I look at the sources and I double check these with the correct kind of sources of those information. So at this point, I'm only doing information based, writing, finding stuff. I'm not doing image yet. I'm purely just kind of focusing on the written kind of form. I might be trying to write something or find information about what to do. Now, likewise, ChatGPT. So ChatGPT, you can do the same kind of stuff that I've done in Google. ChatGPT is not linked into Google. It's kind of its own one. You'll have to download it from the App Store or use it on a website. It's made by a company called OpenAI. There is a version that you can use without logging in, like without creating an account. But there are limitations with what you can kind of do with that. There is a free version at the moment, but like everything that's free, limitations, advertising. So if any of you have watched, you watch TV, listen to the radio, any of those kind of things, the free, in order for it to be free, they kind of support it through advertising. Okay, so it's important to kind of recognize that. And then the free version has a limit on what certain things you can do. But if I look at ChatGPT, I've downloaded it as an app. I'm now going to do a new chat at the top. And this time, so it's going to, oh, sorry. Yep. Oh, sorry. I've gone. Okay. Let's go into ChatGPT. It should come up. There we go. Um, ChatGPT, I'll go into a new chat. Sorry, it's taking you a while for some reason. Sorry, everyone. Okay. Let's see if that doesn't stick. There we go. Okay. Joys of tech. So this time, I'm actually going to ask it. I need some ideas for quick recipes for low salt diet meals. I love the recipe kind of aspect. You can kind of have a play with that. Um, sorry, what's through? Sorry, can you still hear me, Damien? Yep, great. Okay, so my internet has just paused on the presentation. One sec, everyone. I'm so sorry. Let's see if that works now. Okay, so we can try this again. Let's see if this works. I'm going to copy and paste. I've just put in a quick recipe for low salt diet meals. Um, and then it's not liking that. There we go. Okay, good. Sorry, everyone, one moment. Just going to stop sharing for a second. Fix that. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, Damien, you can see my slides again. Awesome, thank you. Let's see if this works. All right, so joys of tech, everyone. So I've just asked it for some ideas for a low salt meals. It's given me a whole range of things here. I might go back to it and say, you know what, give me specific recipes, give me a shopping list. Now you'll notice because it's the free version, here's the little bit of here was the little bit of advertising at the bottom. Uber Eats, because it knows I'm doing food related. So there is advertising there. But this time, I'm going to ask it to translate to Chinese Mandarin. So again, I'm just using my translation all the way through, just to kind of show you that, and you can see how quickly it translates that. Okay, so you could be more specific about this in terms of recipes or food, or you've got 6 people coming over or 5 people coming over, and kind of go back and forward. A couple of vegetarians, that kind of stuff. And I love recipes because it's a really fun, kind of easy way to start and play a little bit. And then WhatsApp, Meta AI. So I'll pause for a second. Anyone that's using WhatsApp and Messenger, particularly WhatsApp, we saw this kind of purple and blue circle appear about a year or so ago. Now they've changed the logo into these kind of couple of dots, kind of a flower, open flower kind of thing. This is Meta AI. And Meta, as I said, is the parent company of Facebook, WhatsApp, and Messenger. Um, so in this instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press on this little icon here, and I'm opening up the AI. I'm kind of saying I'm going into AI mode. It gives you suggestions because it knows some of us don't know where to start. And in this example, what I'm actually doing is using it as a bit of a tech support. I'm asking it for some simple step-by-step instructions for managing my storage on my phone and cloud backup without paying for, and I'll pause for a second, without paying for storage. And this can be an excellent way for you to test out and play with AI if you want to explore it in terms of your technology troubleshooting. I have an iPhone 16. How do I do this? Or an iPhone, Google Android something. It can be a really good kind of way. I fixed coffee machines and ovens through this when we were trying to remember what the settings were and things like that. So it can be really, really useful for that. And again, in this instance, if I'm not happy with the result, I can go back and forward and say, explain it to me simply, tell me how I can solve this. And again, you can translate as well. So this time I'm translating into Hindi as another language. There's different characters. Again, I just want to show you the breadth of some of this translation aspect as well. What happens in Meta AI, and it's with all of them as well, is you've got an opportunity where you can also delete or clear the chat that you're in. So you'll see here, I'm now in a chat with Meta AI. It's like if you're using WhatsApp, you've got a separate conversation with the AI tool. And so you'll have your conversations with your family or whoever it is. They're separate. They're not kind of part of the AI tool. They're separate conversations. But if I then go into that Meta AI, and this starts us thinking about our settings, at the top, when you're in that conversation, there's an opportunity to clear the chat if you want to get rid of it, because I often see people saying they want to clear things, get rid of things as well. So you can always delete the conversation, delete the chat, or clear the chat, right? With all of them, you can also create or modify images. And this gets us into an element of fun, but security. So in this instance, I've used 2 of them, and I've literally, just to kind of move it along, I've taken a photo of a bird that was kind of visiting our balcony, and I've said, make a cartoon version of this bird, of the kookaburra. So I've used it in a kind of fun, non-private kind of, in a private, sorry, non-personal kind of way. And I've just kind of done that, made a cartoon version of that. Obviously, you want to be cautious uploading your own photos, particularly in a free version. And we're going to talk about safety and security now as we start to think about this. But this can be a way of, you can add, play with like a photo of a plant or a bird or anything like that and explore it a bit. And all you're doing is you say create an image or make an image or create this kookaburra in a black and white 1950s style. So you can kind of add the instruction. You've got to think of the instruction. Okay. Just a word of caution, when you're downloading apps from the App Store or Play Store, pay attention to downloading the correct app. So ChatGPT or any of these tools, if you go to the App Store, you can see there's a ChatGPT, but if we play, you can kind of see some of them have similar looking or similar names. So please, for yourself or anyone you're helping, always pay attention to the right app and make sure you're downloading the correct app. So it's just a general kind of word of caution with things. Let me just play that. You can see there's a whole range of chats and different AI tools there. So just make sure you're downloading the right one. So obviously that's some of the kind of how we might use it. Now let's just consider some of the safety, security kind of aspects. Misinformation and fake news. There's a lot of stuff happening at the moment, particularly on social media. All right. A vast majority of us, 75% of us say misinformation is a big problem in today's, and it's all our responsibility. So particularly if any of you are supporting someone that maybe isn't digitally confident, being aware of what they might be consuming and seeing on their social media and how you can fact check thing as well. Just because an image looks real or a video looks real doesn't mean it is. So all these three are actually fake images. They're they're not real. Okay. And so what we want to do is remember to stop and check and just pause, particularly if it's of someone that we know in some way, whether it's personal or whether we know them from a celebrity, public face in some way. We just want to pause and kind of consider, could this be real? And some of the considerations we want to think about. Audio. Um, So if you get a voicemail, you get a phone call, you're hearing something, you're kind of paying attention, sorry, to things like robotic, kind of flat monotone, voices, any odd pauses and abrupt edits. So things that don't naturally flow in conversation, anything that feels a little slightly off from an emotional or rhythm perspectives. And by that I mean if I'm in conversation with you and you've told me something, you're not well or you feel sick, and all of a sudden I still am taking the same approach. I haven't changed my tone, my approach to how you're kind of saying that. That may mean, I've just got to be on guard about that. Perfect or precise language. It's human nature that we say we kind of pause, we may, get our mistakes, we may make mistakes with language. So being cautious of really overly perfect language and phrases that maybe don't suit the person's style. If now that you've seen me on this, you kind of see I talk with my hands, I maybe use my voice in a certain way. So you'd be really mindful of, that's how Richard kind of talks and communicates. So it's knowing that kind of presenter's style. These are not set rules, AI is kind of changing, but these are just things to keep an eye on. Obviously, in video and images, we're kind of paying attention to things like in videos, the lip sync the same speed with what someone's saying, any facial expressions or things that just seem a bit unnatural, blinking, no blinking, body movements. If someone's outside and, for example, there's no wind and the hair is absolutely perfect and some of those kind of things in a video, any mismatched lighting and shadows, blurry edges. And one of the things that AI can sometimes not do very well is weird angles and sudden movements when like something crosses or turns really quickly. It might just slightly um, change the shape of the person. It kind of doesn't handle that really well. It might sometimes cut off a leg or try to kind of change something. So being cautious of those things. What I want us to think about is stop and check, is it a reliable, well-known source? So if we're seeing, particularly on social media now is full of kind of stuff there, but we want to kind of pause. Is it a well-known, reliable, well-known source? How can we fact check it? So if it's about some sort of rule change or something, make sure we're fact checking it or looking off social media, find another source. So that example I showed about maybe laws changing with driving or anything like that, we'd obviously expect that to be available on the New South Wales government or the state government that you're in, the state government laws. There would be something about the laws there. With aged care, you'd make sure you kind of reference the aged care websites. So we're always kind of paying attention to the right source of that. And does it kind of invoke or is it trying to um, cause some sort of emotion, anger, some sort of reaction in some way? So maybe, and this I always advise in scams as well, it's just being paying attention. Is it trying to create an action of some sort, a click, a rage, or something like that? Chat with others about it. We've really got to be talking about these things between our networks, whatever that is. Encourage friends and family and people you support to also talk to you. And there is a growing area of technology that's also happening, which is around AI detection websites. So if you've got an image or a website, you can kind of do some research on there are AI detector kind of websites that you can upload that image and kind of see if it's an AI generated image. Just the kind of final part in our AI kind of search kind of aspect. One of the things that's really good to remember, and I mentioned at the start of this session, is our settings and our digital footprint. So I know many of us are kind of concerned with what these apps know and how we operate online. And so each of our apps, each of the websites we use have settings. And so if you're using Google, for example, in your account, there's kind of there's an area I'm looking at a phone here, but on a website as well, there's an area where you can manage your account. You probably go in there to change your password and other things, but you can look for specifically something called data and privacy or something of that nature. And that's how you can see, if you're ever getting things searching that seem really tailored to what you've looked for, this is where potentially that is turned on and the advertising or the tailoring is really focused on what you've done online. If you turn that off, it doesn't mean you're not going to get advertising though. So I just want to kind of mention that you'll still probably get ads. It just means it might not feel as specific to what you've searched for. All right. But settings in your Google search, in your social media, all the different platforms, there's settings that you can change and look at privacy. So you're looking for things like data and privacy. They're kind of your things you want to have a look at. It's really good to review those fairly regularly. In ChatGPT or the AI tools, there's also settings, and this one I'm using on a computer, but I'll show you in the settings. If I log into the settings, so there's a little settings button at the bottom, and here I'm in the free version. Here, actually, yeah, I'm not even logged in. I'm using just the version that I'm not logged in. But there's an area called Add Controls or Data Controls, and so these are the areas you might turn on or off. They're probably on by default for you, so you can look at turning those off if you choose to. Everything with settings you can turn on and off. So what you turn off, you can turn back on, and turn on, you can turn off, you can turn on. You know what I mean, everyone. So our final word on AI tools, just to kind of think about if you're considering exploring it. So those of you that might be considering exploring it, which, you know, it's I want you all to know what's possible. But if you are considering exploring it with it, start with something very non-personal. Start with something very kind of generic. Don't put personal information in there. Start with things like recipes, food, technology tips, animals, nature, translation, things that are of a general kind of nature. You play a bit and kind of explore that in some way. Remember, AI can be factually incorrect. Sorry, factually, I spelled that incorrectly there. Factually incorrect and wrong. So particularly for things like health, financial advice, general laws and regulations. AI should not be is not replacing that subject matter experts. When Google came out, we had Dr. Google, medical people were kind of saying, we were all self-diagnosing and they were like, please go talk to the professionals. Same with AI. Please always make sure you're getting the right advice for the right kind of situations, and particularly with laws and regulations as well. So I hope that helps in terms of the AI aspect. What I'll do is just I'll kind of continue on with this and then I'll see if there's any questions in a moment. But just thinking about three everyday device tips. So switching gears now. This is something I've got three areas that I really like to show in a lot of my training sessions and things that we might take for granted. So if you've got your phone near you, you might take a look at the same time while I'm kind of talking through these and see if you can find these if you're not already using these. So the three are microphone on the keyboard, changing language on your keyboard, and the quick control settings. So the first one is the microphone. And the microphone is essentially like a digital assistant typing your typist. So instead of typing out something, it gives you, when you see this microphone next to the keyboard. So wherever you see the keyboard, there's a microphone near it. So I've got Apple and Android, and it's the microphone that is near the keyboard. When you press on that, you might have to give permission the first time because you're asking the microphone to be able to do something. Um, but then it goes into listening mode and it lets you, it will type what you say. Just remember to turn it on and off. So what happens is when you press it, it will, if I start saying, oh, I'm not sure what I want to say, it will type, I'm not sure what I want to say. So think about what you want to say, then press the microphone, then say, good afternoon, Damien, looking forward to the training session. Then press the on off, press the microphone again, or press the keyboard to stop it. Otherwise, it will continue recording whatever I say after that into the area. So what that looks like, I'm going to show it on Apple in this case. You can see here, I've pressed the little microphone at the bottom. It's recording me saying, good afternoon, Richard. Looking forward to seeing how I use the trading tips. You can see I must have said that a couple of times. You've provided. Thank you. And then I've pressed the microphone at the bottom. I have a chance to change it or I can send it. So that's really handy if you've got a long message, if your fingers, if it's cold, if you don't like typing, can be really, really useful. It doesn't get names and so sometimes names and places, it kind of needs correction. But I find it a really, really useful kind of thing. And you're getting then used to using your microphone as a way to use technology. The second one for anyone that communicates in more than one language or wants to communicate, write messages in another language, is you can actually have the keyboard changing languages. So you may have to set this up in terms of turning on and adding a keyboard. So if you're communicating in Italian or Spanish or Hindi or any other language, you add that language into the keyboard. So we're not changing the whole phone. The phone may still be in English, for example, but I'm saying I sometimes want to write it messages in Italian. And so that little globe at the bottom there, again, you might have to, on both of them, the globe, sometimes you have to turn that on. And that's a perfect example in AI where you might go, how do I turn on the globe language setting on an iPhone 10 or a Android, whatever version it is? And then it changes the keyboard into that language. Again, very useful for those of us that maybe are communicating in more than one language. The last one is kind of an interesting one that I find a lot of people don't realize they can actually do a bit more with. On both Apple and Android, you've got your quick settings. So you're probably swiping down from the top, or if it's an older phone, maybe swiping up, or when you're watching this, it might change by then. But the quick settings, the quick control settings. And on those settings, most of us have things like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and some of the common things. But what you might not realize is that on both Apple and Android, there is an option. On Apple, it's a plus symbol. On Android, it's a pencil or edit. And you can change the things that are there. So you can add or remove things. So you can add things that maybe you use more frequently. And the other thing that is there is the on-off. Because if we find that we're unable to press the buttons to turn off our phone easily, because now often you have to press two buttons at the same time, and depending on your cover, or your fingers in your hands, you might struggle, or the person you're helping might struggle. That on-off option is a great workaround that I've seen help a number of kind of people in the community. And so on Android this time, I'm going to show you a little example of how this looks. So if I swipe down here, I'm going to press on the pencil. And you can see there's a whole bunch of options here. And what I'm finding on Android is I'm going to go and find my QR code scanner. I'm going to move the QR code scanner. I'm going to make sure I can add that so that it's always on my shortcuts when I'm on an Android phone. And so now I'm going to press the arrow back, and you'll see when I swipe from left to right, right to left, sorry, the QR code scanner is there and will open up the scanner. Now, this is really useful to Android users out there. A lot of you had to download a separate QR code scanner when we had to, start using it. Now, a lot of them are built in. So I'd encourage you to add that and delete any other apps that are QR code scanners that were kind of legacy there as well. Okay. So what we've covered today, so I'll kind of come back to Damien in a moment. What I've spoken about there is I've started to introduce us a bit more to AI. Hopefully you kind of get a little bit of understanding, those of you that haven't used it, what it is, how you might use it. By no means is this an in-depth, you can press on everything. It's about a bit of a taster of what it is, some safety tools, fact-checking, kind of thinking about how we might change some of our settings as well, and safety there. And then three, hopefully, really useful tips that you can use or that you might find will help someone around you. So the microphone, the keyboard, and the quick settings as well. So I thank you for your time. I'm going to stop sharing now, and we're obviously on all the social media platforms and things like that, but I'm going to stop sharing now and come back to Damien. And yeah, thank you, everyone. I'll pass over to Damien and we'll go from there.
Um, Thanks, Richard. We might jump straight into the Q&A while we've got you, and then I'll close out the session. I had a question for Glenda. It was earlier on in your presentation. You were talking about AI tools, and she said, "Is there an app to download?"
Yeah, okay. So basically, AI is a technology that's out there. Do you mean the detection tools or do you mean AI generally?
Um, Glenda, if you want to jump into the
Sorry,
chat
Glenda.
and answer that question. While we wait for Glenda,
Yeah.
we might circle back. Oh, she solved this. Okay, not a problem.
Oh, okay.
We had a question from Diane. Can we get some links to good AI detector sites, please?
I thought someone else. I have to admit, it's something I'm starting to explore. I am hesitant to recommend any just yet because it's a kind of newer area. So stay tuned, shall I say? That's all
And
right.
finally, we had a question from Kerry. How can I ensure that my keyboard language is English, Australia, US, every time I start up my computer? I find that every time I start up my computer that the keyboard language is English, United States, United Kingdom.
Ah, so it sounds like, Kerry, somewhere in your computer, the default setting seems to be picking up the US, and while the English one is there, it's not picking up that one as the default. Um, Depending on what you're using, I mean, I've got a Mac, but you might have a Windows-based one. In the system settings, you check the keyboard, default keyboard. Um, that's where my mind goes for that for you, that the default is not picking up Australia. Maybe you've added Australia, but you haven't made it the default. The other thing is if you want to pop in the chat what you're using, well, Damien's kind of saying I might quickly see if I can find that specifically for you as well.
I will wait and see. But while Kerry is responding, I might just jump back in and just talk through um, Mabel and how we use IO. Oh, sorry. Yes, please. So what was? Oh, you've got that, Richard.
Yeah, I can see that, but I can't see which what you're using. Yeah, which sort of computer. I'll chat in there. Thanks, Damien.
Oh, sorry, my screen's playing up there. I'll try again. Sorry, everyone.
Joys of tech.
Always tech. All right. So Richard, can you give me thumbs up if you can see? Yep, thumbs up, which is great. So I just wanted to talk through Mabel and AI. And does Mabel use AI? And the answer to that is yes. We are a tech company, so we're always open to using the latest technologies and innovations. We are very conscious of the important role we play in people's lives and the sensitive information that we hold and take a very considered approach to AI with policies, guardrails, and privacy protections that help ensure the technology is used responsibly. AI is not being used to fully replace human judgment, empathy, or in decision making. Instead, we focus on using technology to help our teams spend more time supporting customers and improving our services. And what do we use AI for at Mabel? Currently, we use AI as a tool to help our teams work more effectively in areas such as internal efficiency. Like many organizations, we use AI to assist our teams with tasks such as summarizing information, drafting content, improving internal workflows, and supporting operational efficiency. This helps us reduce administrative burden so our teams can focus more on customer support. On the Mabel platform, so this is both the client and support worker platforms. The goal isn't just finding a match, it's about finding the right match. We use AI to rank and recommend support workers for job posts. We use factors such as availability, location, or travel distance, qualifications, and experience to help power the recommendation engine. To ensure our AI systems are safe and remain high quality, we employ rigorous testing and safeguards, including proactive review of AI outputs, I should say, as part of our standard quality assurance. Now, we had a question during the during Richard's presentation about where to get help on Mabel. So there are three places where you can get help. So we have a dedicated phone support team, which is based here in Sydney, and you can contact them on 1300 736 573. And they're available Monday to Friday, 9 to 6 p.m. I've got AEDT here time, but it's Australian Eastern Standard Time currently. We have a live chat on our website, which is manned by our team here in Sydney. And they're also available Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we also have a wide range of help centre articles on the Mabel website. So if you go to mabel.com.au help centre, you'll be able to search for many subjects where we've got help centre articles that can help you with Mabel. Richard, did we hear back from Kerry?
Not specifically, but I just kind of put two quick instructions for Windows and Apple. So hopefully they might help guide. And the other thing I would suggest is otherwise just pop into Google saying change those settings. AI can maybe help with that. Yeah.
Excellent use of the tools. We've come to the end of the webinar. So I first of all would like to thank Richard for his time today and sharing his expertise. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you learned something new about AI. I certainly did, which was exciting. Um, and I would say look out for our next webinar, which will be in June. We'll send more information about that in the coming weeks. I also will say in our newsletter, there'll be a survey about webinars. If you would like to complete that survey and share your thoughts on topics that you'd like to hear from us in our monthly webinars, that will be great. And that will be in our June newsletter. We will also send a copy of this recording to everyone who registered for the webinar today, and you'll receive that around midday tomorrow. So again, thank you so much for your time, Richard, and thank you everyone for attending. And we hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you
Thanks,
all.
thanks everyone.